Graphic design? Can you make a living at that?
Three, two, one, fun, 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 fun.
Welcome to Design Futures, a show about what happens after design school. I'm Chris St. Cyr, and my guest on this episode is Ashley Tucker. It's good to see you.
Great to see you.
Yeah, Ashley is a New York-based designer with 16 years of experience in book publishing. She is an associate art director at Penguin Random House, where she specializes in designing four-color illustrated books that focus on food and lifestyle. Some of her titles include Dirt Candy, Chocolate Every Day, Eat Your Drink, Esquire Dress Code, and The Broke Ass Bride. According to her Instagram profile, she is a sugar enthusiast, and she is a 2006 graduate of the University of Denver. Goodness, it's been so long.
It has been. Don't tell me how
2006.
long. Oh, you just did. 2006.
2006. That's a long time. Of all the people, you and Larry, Glenn, the DU alumni, definitely some of the more seasoned designers, we'll say, that I've talked to. I'm so curious to get into it. As I mentioned before, book publishing is where I started my design career before I got into teaching. So I'm curious to get to hear what you've been doing in that part of design. DU, I want to start there because you've been in book publishing since you graduated. Yeah.
Since I graduated from DU and moved to New York for this job, which I got over a couple of phone interviews and a portfolio website, and flew out here with 2 bags of clothes and a Craigslist sublet for the summer. And I've been here ever since.
Take us through that transition. So you graduated, and then you said you interviewed for this job. Is it? Have you been working for the same publisher since then?
No,
You
so
moved around. Okay.
I moved around. So my first job ever was at Penguin, and it was just Penguin at the time in 2006. And
Okay.
I was working in the advertising and promotions department there, doing what I like to say was everything but the book. So it was
Right.
catalogs, it was print ads, it was little promotional items that tied to books, printed erasers, cookies, yoga mats, things like that. Anything that tied into the book. Still in a time when advertising was primarily done in the print format. Our big marketing spend for only the biggest authors was the full page back of Art's New York Times ad. I think at the time it cost $75,000.
Wow.
It was big. And then right at the end of my time in that department was when animated GIFs became a way to advertise. Websites had ads.
Oh yeah.
And so we were just starting to dip our toe into the water of that, and also HTML emails, just beginning to advertise electronically.
Yeah.
And it was then that I left to go to a very print focused format, which was cookbooks up at Random House at an imprint called Clarkson Potter. And I had no book design experience at that point, lots of everything but the book, but no book design experience. But a friend who had left that advertising promotions department and gone on to design cookbooks interviewed for the position, and she felt it was not the right fit for her, but she emailed me and said, "Can I give them your name?" And I said, "Well, sure, I've never designed a book, but by all means."
Somehow it's a fit for you, even though you've never designed them either. Right?
So I went for this interview, and I often say about designers that we sort of have 2 resumes. We have an actual resume that says what you have done, and then you have a portfolio that shows what you can do. And I remember in my interview, the creative director said to me, if you can design a poster, you can design a book cover. And just having an understanding of layout and design, type hierarchy, you can apply that to different media. And they took a chance on me, and they hired me, and they taught me how to translate all of that into book design. It was while I was at Random House that it merged and became Penguin Random House. And so I was there for several years, and then I had this idea that I might want to leave New York. And I had sort of come to realize that I loved designing cookbooks because it was the sort of perfect marriage of 3 things that I really liked, which was books and design and food. And I felt like if I wanted to leave New York, if I wanted to be closer to my family, I could probably only do 2 of those things. I could probably do branding design and still get design and food, maybe do restaurants, packaging, something like that. I could work at a university press and get books and design, but I probably couldn't get all 3 And consequently, a portfolio that had just work with books wasn't going to help me find a new position in one of these industries. So I reached out to my network and found a job at a branding agency. Again, someone took a chance on me that she's never done this before, but and so I started working at a branding agency called Addison, and it was so different. You know, we had a ping pong table, and it was a bunch of cool design
Oh
kids.
yeah.
And I was this book
Uh-oh.
nerd, and
Yeah.
and you know, their bread and butter were annual reports. But I pretty quickly learned that that was not the place I wanted to be. The client designer relationship is very different than the author design relationship.
Uh-huh.
You know, as publishers, we're paying the authors, and
Right.
so when an author emails you at 4:50 on a Friday and asks for something, you say, "We'll circle back on Monday. Have a great weekend." And in this design studio, you would clear your weekend and you
Yeah.
would work on what they needed. And the work-life balance wasn't great. And so I thought, you know, I think, and I miss reading. I miss being around books. I miss
Yeah.
knowing what was out, what was cool. I miss the access to the books. And so I have nothing bad to say about that place or those people or that kind of work, except that it wasn't for me
Right.
after, you know, the nearly 10 years I'd spent in publishing. And so I said, you know, I think it's going to be New York. It's going to be books. So I emailed my HR friends back in the book world, and I said, looking to come back, keep me in mind if anything opens up. And I got an interview for a job at HarperCollins. And so I was working there. And that was the first time where I was designing also some novels and nonfiction, still primarily cookbooks, but a lot of novels and nonfiction was very new to me. It was a great way to stretch my brain, you know, to do one color book design. And there are some ways less opportunities for creativity in a
Mhm.
book that's primarily running text, but you can really capitalize on the places where there are. And so
Right.
it was great to get to do those alongside some of the cookbooks. At Harper, they divided covers and interiors. There's the cover design team and
Mhm.
an interior design team, which is the way it typically works with novels and nonfiction. But cookbooks, lifestyle books, things that we call in publishing a package, where it's sort of all similarly branded, those are typically done by one person. And so
Oh, okay.
I didn't love that I was missing out on the cover design experience. And I felt like to grow from senior designer into an art director role, I would need that, and I wasn't going to get it there. So as much as I was thrilled to be back in publishing and back doing those kinds of books, I sort of knew that it wasn't my forever home. And 10 months after I started there, I got a call that the publisher who used to helm Potter up at Random House was being moved under a different imprint structure at what was Legacy Penguin, still part of Penguin Random House. They were combining it with another imprint that had a lot of cookbook volume, and they were growing it, and they were looking for an art director to guide that design program. And so they called me about it, and I said, well, gosh, I've only been here 10 months, and I was at my last job for 10 months, and I'm worried about being a job hopper, and that doesn't look great on a resume. And
Right.
then I thought, well, like this, what an incredible opportunity. And they called me, and I should probably just go hear what they have to say. And so a couple interviews later, I wanted it so much, and I was offered the job and accepted. And that's where I've been since. So I'm working at Penguin Random House, and I'm under an imprint called Avery, which is, we do a lot of health focused books, but then
Mhm.
there are some chocolate every day and
That doesn't sound very
some other
healthy.
some other sugar driven books. But there is a lot of health
Mhm.
focused titles, and a lot of vegan titles.
Yeah, I
So
saw a lot of
um,
vegan in the titles, a lot of vegetables. Yeah.
there's a lot of vegan. I'm going to LA next month, and a lot of the cookbooks I worked on have been for vegan restaurants in LA. And the
Oh
friend
yeah.
that I'm going to visit, I said, here are a bunch of places I would love to go. I've worked on the cookbooks for these restaurants, and art directed photo shoots from across the country, but haven't actually been there and eaten the food. I'd love to go. And she was really excited about them all. And I said, be sure you look at the menus, because a lot of these are vegan.
Yeah. Yeah, I can do some vegan dishes, but some I can't. So you sort of you talked about a little bit about it. So right now, when you design a book, you're designing the covers and everything inside,
Mhm.
the whole thing.
Yes. The
Okay.
whole thing. And even earlier than that, we are involved in the process of selecting a photographer. And oftentimes the photographer has a food stylist and a prop stylist that they like to work with. Sometimes they don't. We help put that team together and our direct photo shoot. And then I design the cover and the interior and talk about, the package, the effects. Is it going to have a jacket? Is it going to be what we call a paper over board or an unjacketed hardcover? Do we have the money in the budget for some special effects?
Right. Can you kind of walk me through like what the design process and then the production process? How does it all start and end? I mean, I kind of have a sense, but can you kind of talk about design and production process from a print, perspective?
Absolutely. And we are very print focused in this particular genre of books. They're still mostly consumed as physical books.
Mhm.
They exist as ebooks, but they're not sold in nearly the numbers that a nonfiction or fiction equivalent would be.
Right.
So our priority when we're designing is for the print book. So, from the earliest stages when we have just basically a contact sheet of photos that have come from this photo shoot that we've art directed and a manuscript that's a Word document. We have someone on our team who goes through and identifies all the unique elements that need to be accounted for in sort of a condensed version of the book, which we call our layouts phase, which for a cookbook, sometimes they're 80 pages long, these documents that I end up with, just to account for all of what we call the front matter, the half title page, the title page, introductory material content, is there a pantry section, things like that are all unique. And then we'll design a chapter opener, recipes. It would include any kind of unique element, a recipe that has only one step, so it's not numbered, or a recipe with a tip or a note or an ingredient sidebar, something with enough process photos. And then anything in the back, is there a resources section, things like that. So I designed that initially. And at this time, oftentimes we have the cover finalized at this point because it's the manuscript sort of follows the recipe development and they're shooting that and they're still sort of sometimes tweaking recipes as they're being shot. And so oftentimes the photography is ready to subtitle the title, the author name are known. And so we can start working on that. And so a type program is often loosely established when I start on the layouts phase. And so that gets applied. And in sort of a branded way, we kind of expand what the cover looks like into this interior. And that gets shared with my design manager. We might go back and forth a little bit, and then it goes to the editor who will share it with the author. And we get to a place where we're happy with that. And then it goes out to a compositor who marries it with the full final copy edited manuscript. And it comes back to me to really finesse it, to page it. Cookbooks are printed in 16-page signatures. So I've got to make the book hit an even signature, leaving some space for an index that we don't yet know how long it's going to need to be, and also making the most of the photography we have. So, it's kind of a puzzle, and that route goes back to a copy editor, goes out to the author, everybody gives feedback on it, it comes back to me. We go through that round of revisions and reviews 3 times, sometimes 4. And at that point, what's also happened is that the color correction of all the photography has caught up to it. The photography goes out to a pre-press house, which they do some initial color correction based on the printer's profile, the kind of paper that we're going to be printing on. And they send those back to us, and my production manager and I will review them together. It used to be in the office in the Lightroom. For the last 2.5 years, it's been the 2 of us at each of our homes waiting for a sunny day, doing our best.
A sunny day, that's key. Why is a sunny day important?
Just that was sort of the only calibration we could achieve. At the office, we've got these Kelvin lights and they're the same ones that the printers have, but at home, the best you could do was to get a sunny day. Now we are allowed back in the office. People aren't really going in very much, but Tom and I will make a plan to meet there and review the proofs. So, we make notes on color. This meat is too pink. This bread is too blue, and goes back to the prep house and they make those corrections. So that's all sort of happening on its own schedule while these passes of the interior are happening. And at the end, it all gets married up and it goes to the printer, and we print most of these books overseas. It's a
Mhm.
superior product at a better price, but it takes a long time. So they go to print a long time before they are
Yeah.
ever on sale in the bookstore. They get printed, they get bound, they go on a boat, and
Yeah.
they sail their way over here, and then they're on sale for everyone. So
Yeah.
it takes a long time. I think that they print about 3 months before are on sale.
Let's take a look at, so this one, the Chef's Garden, you were mentioning this one is sort of unique in the size of it, I guess.
The
So
size of
what's,
it, I mean, the size
yeah.
in so many ways. It's a larger trim size, a larger physical dimension, because we didn't want it to be 1,000 pages long. So you can get more on a page when the pages are larger. But this is about a farm in Ohio called the Chef's Garden, and they grow things I had never seen. They grow so much, and they supply food to a lot of really high-end restaurants. They have a direct-to-consumer division. It's a massive enterprise, and there were 4 photo shoots for this book to capture the different seasonality of things that they grow. I got to go out for our summer shoot because we were going to try to capture the cover shot at the time. And we had the idea to have Farmer, who you see on the cover there, Farmer Lee Jones, out in the field with this basket of abundant produce. That was the case. It doesn't always happen this way, where you have an idea for a cover and you shoot it and it works, and the sales team is on board. Everybody that needs to check the box at the office is happy with it. So we have 2 photographers for this. Yasi did the food photography, and she and her prop stylist Allie flew out there. So they are behind all of these sorts of still life photos and the recipe shots. And then
So
there's the woman, Michelle. Yes, Michelle works for the farm. And so she captured all of the product shots that you see throughout the book. And within the Chef's Garden, there's a smaller group called the Culinary Vegetable Institute, CVI, and Jamie Simpson is the chef there, and he's developed these recipes. And so he was the food stylist for this. Oftentimes at a photo shoot, there will be a separate food stylist. So he prepared the recipes and he styled them, and he and Allie would work together in advance and choose the plating. They would decide, for example, that these fried blossoms were going to be on this rack and that they were going to use this jar, and that's how they would display it as opposed to on a plate. And so they would sort of strategize that, get it set up. Yasi would be working on her lighting setup. So the recipes are interspersed in each section. So again, this was a real pagination puzzle to try to get things to end on a spread so that recipes could open as they needed to. And there were opportunities to use some of the beautiful photography to kind of help that pacing along.
You just
It
use
was
the
such a
key,
fun
the
project.
key word, like the pacing, right? I mean, I think that like you must live pacing. There's just so many unique elements to a cookbook.
Yes. And a thing that has come along for book publishers in the last, it was just starting to become a useful technology to us at the end of my time at Clarkson Potter, was, you'll hear it called different things, styled manuscripts, structure tag manuscripts, where the production editor goes in and she in Word styles everything, which means that she is like, if something is bold, she's not just highlighting it and clicking the bold button, she's applying a character style to it. And she goes through and she creates different styles for lists, first entry, all the middle entries, the last entry, heads, subheads, heads that don't have space. And so when I flow the Word document into InDesign, it imports all of those. So this sweet spot, this is the second book we're looking at here that has a jacket and a case, which has just not been the trend for cookbooks lately, but every once in a while there will be one where it just feels right. And the thing you can't see in this flat shot is that all of those circles are foil. It is a very expensive effect, and it is charged by the square inch, not by how much of it you're using. So even though there's just a whisper of a line,
right,
I used a lot of foil for this, and I got to fight for it. So you'll see around the letters, there's a little bit of white space because we had to account for a certain amount of registration variation. There was a certain amount that the printer is allowed on press. So this is our cover. The editor did not love the photography for this. I think it's gorgeous, but for whatever reason, she right up front said, well, you'll just have to figure out how to hide it. And just so
How to hide the photos.
um,
Oh.
how to hide it, but to still make it a highly illustrated book. And so this idea for these circles came about to essentially be able to crop out a lot. The solution was to find interesting ways to not use all the photography full bleed, full page all the time. And so this design idea of circles, you'll see that the note is in a circle, the page numbers are in a circle, the page numbers move around, the table of contents was a big circle, the half title was a circle, all of
Yeah.
these little caption numbers are circles. So just kind of echoed throughout and allowed the photography to kind of live in a different way. But it was also a really fun design challenge. And this is one of my favorite designs. You know, we were talking earlier about cookbook design being the sort of marriage of these three things that I really enjoy. And because the thing that I make goes out in the world to be enjoyed by everyday people, it sort of gets used and appreciated and recognized in different ways. So obviously there are book design awards, which only book designers know about. But this
Right.
book was nominated for a James Beard Award,
Oh,
which
nice.
people who are interested in food know about. Some of my books have been New York Times bestsellers, and so people who follow that know about it. And so it's fun to get to tell my family, hey, this hit the New York Times list. People that I know follow the New York Times list, friends and family who love to see the James Beard nominees, and this was one.
So quick side note, because you mentioned your family and design. So does your
Yes.
family now know what you do? Like, did they know did they know what design was when you first started doing this?
They do, because I make a thing. My brother's in finance, and I'm like, so you don't make a thing or do a service. I have a harder time getting my hands around that. My dad was a surgeon and my mom was an architect, and so those are very
Right.
tangible things. And so to be able to put this thing in their hands and say, I did this,
Right.
is very gratifying. And then to be able to tell them, like, it's been recognized in this way.
Yeah,
is
that's
fun.
great. So what's Dirt Candy? This book
So
here,
Dirt
it's like a
Candy-
comic book, graphic novel cookbook or
It
something.
is. I've never done anything like this before or since. Dirt Candy is a restaurant in New York City. Amanda Cohen is the author of this. She owns the restaurant, and I forget if she had just been on Top Chef or something. She was unfamiliar to me when we started working on this, but the restaurant's vegetarian. They wanted to do this graphic novel style narrative at the beginning of the book and after each chapter opener, and the recipes themselves were going to be illustrated, as you see here. So this was very new to me. And
Were you nervous about it? Illustrated food?
so when I was assigned this book, I went to the restaurant, and the food was wonderful and it was so impressive looking. And I felt like, oh, this graphic novel style is not going to do it justice, but it's just so unique and interesting. The recipes are complicated. We were talking about calling these like the components of the recipes, because oftentimes you need to make 6 different recipes to make this. You'll see at the top there, it tells you you're going to need to make a celery salad and this pesto and this dressing and this cheese curds. Like, it's going to send you to a lot of other sections of the book to make yourself dinner.
Boy.
So, and that's why the drawings of the finished dishes point you to all of the different components of it. But it was really fun, and she was really cool.
So I got to ask, please tell me that you use Comic Sans in this book.
Ooh. No, it was something for sure that was licensable and similar.
And similar to Comic Sans.
Similar. But this is one of those scenarios where you have an illustrator who's doing something for you that involves type. And so there's often a question of whether they're going to set the type themselves or whether they're going to leave space for it and the designer's going to do it, and who's going to handle text corrections if it's all been, flattened. Am I going to have to go in and try to borrow an R here to make a word, make an apostrophe, or are we going to leave it as live type in the InDesign file? And we're hoping that the font that we end up using is approximately the size of what they've left. That's a question that is never easily answered. It happens with everything you do like this.
All right, let's look at the last one. The Esquire magazine dress code book, A Man's Guide to Personal Style. Maybe I need to get this one.
So I was hired as a freelancer to do this. Yes. This was done by Sterling, which is the publishing arm of Barnes and Noble. and Esquire is their book partner.
Mm.
So they got in touch with me about doing the interior design for this. I had, you know, the sort of general magazine style to go from, but obviously in a book format, it's very different, and different too, even from a cookbook, in that there wasn't really a lot of template based design or format based design. You know, like, once you get through all the special sections of a cookbook, the meat of it is still recipes. And for the most part, they all have a title, a yield, prep time, a head note,
Yeah.
ingredients, procedures. Everything about these little sections was different. And so, you know, it's visually very interesting, but every single spread got treated as its own animal. This book did not use a compositor, which makes that honestly easier for the designer when you are in charge of the entire thing. You're not trying to explain to someone else how to flow in the text and then give it back to you to finesse
Oh,
it
yeah.
all. You are just in charge of it the whole time.
There's a lot of design in there, a lot of
Yeah.
type, which I love to have a conversation once in a while where it's just so focused on just like page layout and type and image, but you know,
Yeah.
using a grid and having those kind of
Yeah.
systems.
Yeah. And even within recipe design, there are still so many things that you can do with a page that fundamentally needs to convey the same information from book to book.
Yeah,
The grid of a recipe is one of my favorite ways to try something new.
it's good
And
exercise.
it's a challenge to get it all to play nicely together on a page, but you know, to each be distinct, to make it clear that this section is telling you something
Yeah.
different from this section.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is, who are the authors of cookbooks?
You know, increasingly it's people with really robust Instagram followings,
Wow.
because
Okay.
they're very attractive to publishers because they have done so much of their own marketing. We've done a lot of books where the author is actually the one-stop shop for all the photography. They'll do the food styling,
Mhm.
they'll do the prop styling, they shoot it themselves. And you know, sometimes they're working with something that's only slightly better than an iPhone, and sometimes they have a very professional setup. And sometimes they say, I do a great job for my Instagram, but you guys are the professionals and I want a team to do this. And
Yeah.
they come to the shoot, but they let other people do it. So there's a lot of variation on that front. And then there are for sure chefs and just generally people in the food world. When I was working at Potter, they were partners with Food Network. And so a lot of the books that
Okay.
were coming through at that time were Food Network. I did, you know, Adele Lawson, Sunny Anderson. They still do the Bobby Flay books, the Ina
Yeah.
Garden books, the Giada De Laurentiis books. That's changed a little bit because again, the Food Network is not the only place you learn about chefs anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, a book I worked on recently is called The Korean Vegan, and she was an attorney in Chicago and became famous on TikTok for these videos she was doing where she was telling these incredible stories while she was making the food of her culture. And she has since quit working as an attorney and is now a full-time author, food blogger. But she, in our cover design process, we narrowed it down to 3, and she polled the crowd and said, which one of these do you like for my cookbook? And I mean, that's just, it's an
Yeah.
entirely different thing, you know, when you can say to the sales team, who usually is the final word on the cover, like, this is what we can sell. And you know, sometimes it's very arbitrary, like, we can't sell a yellow book right now.
Right.
Okay, so we're going back to the drawing board. Like, this other one that was just the bestseller was yellow, and we can't do this
Yeah.
again. But to have an author say, you know, 400,000 people voted on this,
Okay. I guess we'll go
you
with it.
can't argue with these numbers.
Right. Right.
So the sales team will give their blessing on us going forward with one of these 3. But you know, that was just a totally different exercise in book design.
It's a different world than I remember working in a few decades
Mhm.
ago, for sure. So that's your career, which is like, there's some amazing work. It's beautiful work. You've been doing
Thank
this
you.
so long. Like, that's what you've been passionate about. The question I have to ask, I mean, there's lots of questions to ask, but the question I do have to ask is where we met at DU in the EMAD program. It's called EMAD,
Mhm.
Electronic Media Arts
Mhm.
Design.
Yes.
Just the name of that should tell people listening that that seems like really far away from like print book design. So can you make a connection for me, like what was going on in that program and what you took away from it and how you kind of
Mhm.
use that to like get yourself into this very print focused area of design.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reflecting on that before we talked today, thinking that, and not only am I a person who works in the field that I got a degree in, but I feel like I launched out of DU ready to do this job. And I think a big part of that was software training. I mean, we were using InDesign, we were using Illustrator, we were using Dreamweaver back
Yeah.
in the day. But I had just enough skill at writing HTML to build a portfolio website, which living in Denver and getting a job in New York was hugely important. I didn't come out here to interview in person, but I was able to show someone my work instantly. So like I said, I transferred to DU. I had been at Northwestern University for 2 years on a pre-med track and
That's different.
decided that was not going to be the thing for me.
Sorry,
but
Dad.
at that point, I know, I know. So I spent the summer between my sophomore year at Northwestern and my first year as a junior at DU, making up all of the sort of foundational fine art classes at University of North Carolina where I was living. And so I was doing, the painting, the sculpting, the drawing, all of that over the summer. So when I landed at DU, it was just really intensive graphic design work for those 2 years. I had largely satisfied my general education requirements from having been so scientifically focused. And so it was just like this lovely era of all design for me. And I took the DU publishing course, not the extended one, but the undergrad single quarter version. And I think that's where I got this idea. Like, I think I want to do books. I think I want to do graphic design and books. I really felt like, I had the really sort of old school appreciation for typography where we were like drawing out the different typefaces and appreciating their nuances. But then, some of the more avant-garde things that we were doing in Tim's classes and things we were being exposed to there. And between my junior and senior year, I had an internship at the Yale University Press. And so I got to really do book design there and put some things into my portfolio for applying to jobs that were like truly out in the world, not just student work. But there was a really good mix of things there. And I think my education really perfectly equipped me to find the job and to start doing the work on day one. And I'm thinking back to our senior show. I had two pieces in that. One was sort of an immersive video thing. We wore these goggles to watch it. And the other was a series of books that I had designed and bound by hand. They were the same dimensions once they were bound, but one was open in sort of landscape format and had two columns, and it was called Tall Tales Pretending to be Short. And the others were short stories pretending to be tall. So it was a very vertical format. So when they're stacked together, they're the same size. I made 4 of each, and they were bound on opposite sides. And then I had shown also like how you make the signatures and how you sew the signatures and how you apply the cloth that holds it together, the adhesive, and kind of displayed it all. And, I knew how to do all of that between EMAD and my internship. I definitely got what I needed from that.
Yeah, that sounds like you made it work for yourself. I want to back up from there. So your mom was the architect, right?
My mom was an architect.
Yeah. So
she went back to grad school when we were young.
Yeah. So were you like surrounded by creativity or art making or designing in your house growing up as a kid? And
she was a great designer of all kinds. She was a fantastic interior designer and a fantastic architect. She just had a great eye for that. And I think one of the things that I'm so grateful to her for was her sense of craftsmanship. There was never, a bead of glue out of place on these architecture models. She was a perfectionist about things. So I get that from her. And my dad too, as a surgeon, is very precise, but he's also, there's nothing I have asked him how to do or how to make that he doesn't know. He's incredibly skilled, with tools, with photography, all kinds of things. And so just that sort of quest for knowledge and to be able to know how to do things and to want to make things, I get that from him. I'm very handy and I give credit to him for that. So I think I'm a nice combination of that.
One question that a lot of students and young designers are curious about is like, working with clients. And so like what one question was like, what's the most difficult aspect of working with, I'll say, authors for you, or who are the clients? Is the editor sort of the client for you, or the author the client? But what have you experienced working with, say, authors and editors?
Yes. I would say that the editor and the author are the client. Sometimes the author's agent is also the
Oh,
client. Sometimes
right.
they're very
Right.
active in the conversation. I would say a challenge that comes up often is you get pretty close to something that you're happy with, and then they'll say like, "Could we just try this thing?" And oh, you don't want to try that thing, and you try it and it doesn't work, and so you write back and be like, I tried it and it's unbalanced, or you give a thoughtful artistic explanation of why. Like, could I
Uh,
just see it? Oh, and then you have to send it, and you just hope that they see what you see. I try to always remember that this is their book, this is their
right.
baby. As much as it's my design and I love working on it, this is a professional accomplishment for them, and it's the
Right.
expression of what they do and what they love to do. And so I always want them to be happy with their book and proud of their book. But of course, I always want to be happy and proud of their book as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's especially a challenge if an author has, a spouse, a partner, a friend who's a
Mm,
graphic designer, or,
sure.
I sent this out to all my friends and asked what they thought. And you get a lot of those. I'm hearing a lot of this, or I'm hearing a lot of that. My friends think this.
Yeah.
That can be challenging too.
So when you're doing a cover, do you
Mhm.
submit, like, do you show like three ideas, or how does that
Oh, no.
work?
So I generally start by saying to the editor, are there any musts? And that's assuming that we haven't identified something we want to be our cover going into the
Mhm.
shoot. Sometimes it's, a recipe this restaurant is famous for, a dish that made this author famous, something that we know is just beautiful. And we say, like, when we shoot that for the book, we're gonna remove some props, make some room for type, pull out, try that for a cover. So oftentimes we do have a cover image in mind. And then, I start playing with type. And so I don't necessarily show every permutation of type ideas with covers. The people that I work with are pretty good at visualizing or asking for me to try the type for number 2 with this one 7. And then I dip into the program for the entire interior and pull things that I like. I usually show a first round. There might be 20 to 30 in there.
Wow.
In the olden days, we used to, in the office, lay them all out on the conference table, and we'd start flipping things over and kind of
Yeah.
narrowing it down. And then they would go to what's called our cover meeting, and that has the marketing people there. And so we start the conversation with a bigger group. Now that people mostly shop for books on Amazon and this tiny little thumbnail, the
Mm,
design considerations have changed a lot. You can't have this delicate, beautiful little title. It's got to be visible, and the
sure.
subtitle's got to read. And the food needs to be clear what it is at that size. And so when we show covers now, we show the big one, and then there's a little thumbnail beside it,
Oh,
so
that's
you can see it
fascinating.
at the same
Yeah.
time. That
So what happens when you're showing all those covers? So it must happen to you, because it happens to every designer when you're showing multiple things, and then whoever's looking at the project, whatever it is, in this case covers, they do the thing where they say, okay, can we have like that type from there and that image over
Mhm.
there and this color palette from this one, and then they like Frankenstein the thing together and create this whole new design. Like
Mhm.
how do you handle that as a more seasoned designer?
Oftentimes those suggestions work. Like, this group is very, very good at that, and
Yeah, okay.
so they're not generally suggesting things that don't work. That's a forum where it's okay to say, the reason that that type works on this one is because of the space created by that, and here the balance is going to be off. And so you can
Yeah,
sort of talk through some of that in advance. Generally I take notes, and then I go back and I try it, and sometimes it spins off a new idea,
right.
and they're receptive to all that. And then it may do a quiet round in email before it goes back to the meeting again, and we
Yeah,
go through a few rounds, and then we start talking about effects, what's
right.
gonna really make this sing. Like, it would be really great if this could be a 3-piece case, which is when the material on the spine is something different. It's sort of like what you see
Right.
underneath the jacket of a
Yep.
of a hardcover novel. It's got a different material on the spine. So lately the trend has been for that to be different and printed, and then it sort of corresponds to what's happening on the boards, the sides, front, and back. Expensive though, so you kind of sometimes have to reverse engineer it. Like, going in for this book I'm working on now, I had in mind something, because we have illustrations on the interior. I had in mind doing an illustrated spine like that, but it would really sting if it could be that 3-piece case. So before I even started on it, I had to say, is this something we're going to be able to afford when we get
Yeah.
done? I don't want to show this if it can't be what I envision it being.
Can you talk about like your hierarchy? You're an associate art director. Do you have like, do you manage a junior designer, or there's somebody above you, a creative director? What's the kind of the structure like?
I don't manage anyone. Our department structure is pretty flat. And so there are a couple of other associate art directors that manage different imprints, and those are primarily one-color novels and nonfiction. And then my art director sort of oversees all of us. So I'm primarily cookbooks, and then, occasionally some novels and nonfiction even now. And then there's an imprint called Tartar Parody that does a lot of gifty items, journals, things like that. So there's someone that manages those. And then there's, an imprint that's primarily fiction and occasional nonfiction. There's another fiction that's like mostly thrillers. And so we all kind of have our own little silo, and we all report to one person.
Can you talk about a range of salary that somebody in your level, or even coming up, like how has it changed? Like you've moved with companies too, that always like affects salary, but.
Yeah. And I think that, there's at Penguin Random House anyway, there's not a lot of turnover, and it's a thing that has come up for our company lately. It's hard to get promoted because there's so much loyalty. Some people have spent their entire careers at Penguin, and so sometimes to make a big move salary wise or title wise, you have to leave, and sometimes people come back. Never burn a bridge in publishing. Small enough that you are going to work with these people again.
Absolutely.
But then, entry level salaries in publishing have historically been below a living wage for New York City. And I mean, this, pre-COVID, pre-working from home, you had to be in New York. And that's been an issue for this industry for a long time. And it's been something that they've come to terms with, especially in the last couple of years when talking about, the equity of accessibility to these positions, essentially whose family can afford for you to have this entry level job in New York. And so they've been working on that.
So what do you do when you're not designing beautiful books for Penguin Random House?
I like to do a lot of yoga. I run, go to the gym a lot. It used to be a very social thing to go to the gym. I would go with friends from the office at lunch. Now it's more like, well, see when I get there because everyone's at home. And then during the early days of the pandemic, like walking outside was a very safe thing to do. So you would, walk to meet up with somebody and be outside. I read a lot. I read about a book a week.
Wow. Fast reader.
And watch a lot of TV, especially during the last 2 years. And, prior to COVID, when we were allowed to meet in person in large numbers, I was part of a big book club here. Our meetings were usually 25 to 30 women, and we had a cocktail hour and then like a very academic sit down discussion for an hour about a book. And I miss that. Yeah. And then also I cook a lot, as you might imagine.
Cook. I've seen some
proximity to all of these.
Yeah. I've seen some of your baking.
I used to bake a lot for the office. I would take treats in all the time.
You were that person.
Now I bake for my doorman.
All right, we got to move on to some more specific questions. They do involve some food. So the pop quiz. First one, work beverage.
I am fueled by Diet Dr. Pepper.
Oh, I haven't had that answer before. After work beverage.
Yeah. It's wine, either like a bone dry white wine in the summer or a big red in the winter.
Favorite New York restaurant?
I really love this place called Loring Place. I want to order everything on the menu when I go there. It's just delicious. Dan Kruger is a chef. It's so good.
Type or image?
Type.
Do you listen to music while you're working?
I listen to podcasts.
Crime, true crime?
Podcasts. So much true crime. I've been listening to all the Datelines. They've turned them all into podcasts. Oh God, so much murder.
So much.
When I was at the office, it was all podcasts. Now that I'm home and I can have the TV on, sometimes I'll just have a show on in the background. The West Wing is a go-to for me.
Lots of talking in the West Wing.
Yes.
Favorite meal to cook?
I love a good lasagna. It's rewarding. You make it, it transforms itself in the oven. It's delicious. You get to have it for days.
Okay, appetizers or desserts?
Desserts.
Desserts.
Plural. Did you know plural? Desserts.
Yes, exactly. Best eating experience you've ever had. So like the whole experience, food, the setting.
I took my dad to 11 Madison for my birthday last year. He came to visit me in New York. We had a wonderful weekend together, but we went to 11 Madison, which is, it had just gone vegan, but that was never a place you went before for a cut of meat. Everything there is so interesting and experimental. And he lives in Charleston. They have some really amazing restaurants, James Beard Award-winning restaurants. They have their own food and wine festival. It's a great food scene, but there's something just so different about 11 Madison that it was wonderful to experience it and to watch him experience it in that space. And on my birthday, I think that's probably top.
Nice, very nice. Okay, last question. If you weren't a designer, what would you be?
I think I would still be a maker of some kind. I've always been a very big fan of Martha Stewart. Back when she had her Martha by Mail catalog, I always loved the craft kits, and I loved wrapping paper and presentation and packaging. It would still be something tactile and visual and beautiful.
All right. Okay. So, what are your final thoughts for those aspiring designers? Maybe for those few that want to get into book design because it's so specialized these days. Like,
I think a strong portfolio that's easily distributable is key. It needs to look nice. It needs to function well. It can take forever to load, and show your work in its best light. I think it's better to show strong work than a breadth of different kinds of work. Increasingly, it's easy to have a strong Instagram feed if you don't truly have a portfolio site. So there are ways to cultivate that without learning how to write code or to get a Squarespace site. But I think that's so key for a designer, because like I said, it shows what you can do. If you've never had a design job, but you have an amazing portfolio, you can show what you can do without having ever put anything out into the world or sold anything to a client.
that sounds good. You gotta have a strong portfolio. Gotta show those book covers bigger and thumbnail size as well. Well, that's our time. It's been too long. We have to talk again sooner than 16 years from now.
Yes. Oh boy. Yes.
Now that I know you are there, you're right there in Manhattan. So take me to one of your fancy restaurants. We'll go. And I want to have a good restaurant experience with your guidance. All right.
I would love that.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Ashley.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
It is a synergistic effect produced by wholes.
So what do we learn from Ashley? Number one, read the text, read the article, read the story that you're going to design for. Number two, if you want to get into publishing, know your typography. And three, when you need to sign off on the color proofs of your design and you're working from home, make sure you're looking at them on a sunny day. Thanks to Ashley Tucker of Penguin Random House. If you have any comments or questions for me or any of the guests, please leave them in the comments. And subscribe so you can catch the next episode of Design Futures. Until next time, go learn something. Your future depends on it. Thanks for listening. See ya.